brother Hussam Qutub, who's going to actually introduce this afternoon's presenter for us, in that of Sheikh DeLorenzo.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Hussam Qutub. I am actually with Guidance Residential. We're the leading provider of Islamic home financing in the United States. So I'm going to need to speak fast, otherwise I'm going to face the music. All right, so I want to give you a quick introduction about...
Don't speak fast, speak thoroughly.
Thank you. You know, a little background, just to kind of ground all of us back to why we're in this industry. There's, you know, this is commerce, of course, but it's commerce with ethics and values. I want to take a little bit of time initially to kind of bring us back to why does Islamic finance exist, but why does it matter? Why does it matter to all of us? And then why does it matter more than ever today? We look around the world, we see a lot of broken things. We see rising poverty, we see rising inequality, rising debt, rising unemployment. We don't talk a lot about these things, but the 8 men in this world are richer than the poorest half of the world population. If you kind of wrap your head around that, I know it's almost a concept that you can't even think about. We see an estimated 210 million people around the world unemployed, and that number keeps growing year over year. We see in the richest country in the world, in the US, 860,000 plus people homeless. Nearly 37 million people are living under poverty, under the poverty line. And around the world, debt has crippled societies, but to bring it home, there's 30,000 children under the age of 5 every day dying due to debt. That's according to UNICEF. So what's broken? Well, the modern economic system is the root cause of all of this. I'm going to introduce you to something that many of you probably already know, and I apologize for going over something you may know, but if you don't know this, I think it's very consequential. One of the issues is fractional reserve banking. The basic fractional reserve banking cycle works in a way where, you know, we all put our money in banks. There's no other place to put them, let's be honest. You're not going to put it under your mattress. You're not going to put it under your pillow. It's not safe. So we park our money for safekeeping in banks. And if I had $1,000, I put it into a non-interest-bearing checking account. That $1,000, 10% of it gets reserved, 90% of it the bank takes and lends it out at interest. And as it does so, it lends it out to things that I may or may not agree with. The person receiving it, simply by swiping a credit card for $900 to purchase, let's say, an airline ticket, receives their airline ticket. The bank takes that $900, or I'm sorry, the airline takes that $900 and deposits it in its bank. The bank takes it, holds 10%, lends out $810, 90%. This is a cycle, and just 3 cycles in, you have $1,000 that's now become $3,439. This is the definition of creating something from nothing. This is a shadow economy. But it is more so an economy that benefits the 10% at the expense of the 90%. There's a lot more I can go into today, time will not allow. I want you to think about just here in the United States, the amount of money that Muslims have in these banks sitting. Some estimates are well over $100 billion. And that money is essentially fuel. It's fuel. So we're fueling what we call a value-neutral system. And that value-neutral system essentially is focused on deregulation, deception, and ultimately causes a lot of instability. The booms and the busts that we hear of come from the core value-neutral approach to finance, which means profit at all costs as long as it's legal. Doesn't matter what I feel about it, it's legal. And if it's not legal and it could make a lot of money, I'm going to work to deregulate it. The cannabis industry is a perfect example in our lifetime. So Islamic finance comes from a timeless value perspective, where there's regulation, divine law, where there's transparency, where there's stability. So let me quickly introduce you to us. Guidance, we've been around for 25 years. We're a values-driven company. Our parent, Capital Guidance, many people ask us, are you owned by the banks? Are you owned by a riba-based mortgage company? The answer is no. We're owned by a private equity group. 65-year-old private equity group, 3 Muslim families started the organization. All companies built from the ground up as independent institutions. And when you see, and I apologize, but when you see this, you'll understand a little bit about what we've essentially done, our impact. These are the number of states we operate in today, alhamdulillah. And this is the system we're creating, a circular Muslim economy that doesn't leak out our wealth to institutions that seek to do harm to society. Because the missing piece in all of this is Islamic finance, and owned by and managed and led by Muslim institutions. Now let me introduce our dear scholar, Sheikh Yusuf DeLorenzo, who is the keynote speaker for today. Sheikh Yusuf was part of the group of scholars back in 1999 that we gathered along with Mufti Muhammad Taqi Osmani, Dr. Muhammad Al-Ghari, Dr. Abdul Sattar Baghudda, Allah yarhamu, Sheikh Nidam Yaqubi. Those were the scholars that were brought together for this remarkable project that we took on. And it took 3 years, millions of dollars, 18 law firms that specialize in US financial laws, to develop our program. Sheikh Yusuf is a scholar of Islamic financial transaction laws who works with international financial entities beyond just guidance, including institutional and private investors, home finance providers, investment banks, index providers, asset managers, and governments. He's the author of several publications in the subject of Islamic finance and has served in an advisory capacity of financial and academic institutions, including IOFI, the Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions. Also, the International Sharia Research Academy at the State Bank of Malaysia, the International Center of Education in Islamic Finance, the libraries of Stanford University, the Hamdan bin Muhammad University in Dubai. He asked me not to continue reading his bio because I could really be here for another 3 minutes giving you his background. But that's the kind of humble individual he is. His academic work has been published in English, Arabic, Farsi, and Urdu. MashaAllah. Without any further ado, help me give a warm welcome to Sheikh Yusuf DeLorenzo.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Thank you for sticking around today to listen to whatever I have. And thank you to the organizers and presenters who've preceded me. I used to think of myself as an eloquent speaker and a wonderful debater. That's not the case anymore, so you'll have to forgive me. You'll have to bear with me a little bit. I'm going to read Nuruddin, Muhaddith and Faqih of Hindustan, perhaps best known for his commentary on Mishkatul Masabih, a book of hadith, was popularly known as Mullah Ali Qari. Perhaps the most famous of his many scholarly works was a book entitled Ahkam al-Quran. Afwan. See, here I go again. Ahkam al-Hajj, a comprehensive treatise on every aspect of this all-important aspect of our faith. In recognition of his scholarship, his patron, the Mughal Badshah, sent him for Hajj as the official representative of the then most wealthy and prestigious dynasty in the entire world. In view of Mullah Ali Qari's standing as a scholar and his prestige as a representative of the fabulously wealthy Mughal Empire, his hosts in Mecca greeted him and his entourage with every sort of honor. Then, as Mullah Ali was dressed in ihram as he entered Mecca, his hosts cleared the haram so that their honored guest might perform tawaf on his own and without the usual jostling from pilgrims in the mataf. So imagine their horror and the terrible embarrassment on the part of the entourage, and indeed especially on the part of the esteemed scholar himself, when he began the tawaf in the wrong direction, clockwise. My intention in relating this story is not to impugn the reputation of a great scholar, nor is it cited to demonstrate the truth that to be human is to fail occasionally, is to err. Rather, what I mean to convey is the truth that there is nothing like hands-on experience. In our own juristic tradition, we read of students sitting at the feet of their teachers, traveling with them from city to city for years, literally for years, before their teachers granted them ijazah, or permission to disseminate knowledge on their own. The same is true in our spiritual traditions. Murids, aspirants, spend years with spiritual masters, shuyukh, serving them in every possible way and learning by observing, even at meal times, until they received the permission they coveted and worked so hard to achieve. So what about Mullah Ali Qari and modern Islamic finance? Let's consider our recent history. Following a century or more of colonial occupation and an even longer period of economic domination by European powers, in no time, commercial banks were quick, Western commercial banks were quick to establish themselves in every port where Muslims had dominated trade for centuries, making themselves commercial banks, European commercial banks, established themselves in every port around the world, especially in our part of the world, where we had established networks of trade over the centuries, all the way from Al-Maghreb to the Philippines. Those banks made themselves essential to the new paradigm of trade in those places. By making themselves essential to the trade, they also brought their usurious practices. So in the 20th century, Muslims began the process of rebuilding the institutions we had lost to misuse and atrophy, including the educational, judicial, political, charitable, and finally, our financial institutions. Muslim intellectuals wrote about the ideals of an Islamic economy. Sayyid Qutub, for example, Ali Shariati, Ahmad al-Najjar, Maulana Maududi, all of them stand out as pioneers and thought leaders. Academics followed with treatises, seminars, and conferences, all of which contributed to planting the seed in the minds of the Muslim public, especially financial professionals, who gave serious thought to effectuating the ideas of the academic community. In the 1950s, conferences on Islamic economics were held by government authorities, like the State Bank of Pakistan, Malaysia, Iran, Egypt, and elsewhere. By the 1960s, Muslim financial professionals envisioned the establishment of Islamic banks. The first conference on the topic of Islamic finance, as opposed to Islamic economics, was held in Egypt, where a short time before, the Mitl Bank had been established. Although the bank was short-lived, as its provenance in Sharia was viewed with suspicion by the government, surprise, surprise, it set a precedent and led to similar efforts in other jurisdictions, including Europe. To simplify where I'm going in this talk, I'll state the problem that led to the collaboration that was key to the gradual success of the new sector. The Sharia-compliant transactions of the first Islamic banks left accountants and auditors confused. Their training, their experience, and orientation toward the net interest margin model for banks, in other words, usury, provided no help in understanding the ways in which the new banks allocated the funds they collected through deposits. And the deposits came flowing in. There was never a problem with deposits. Throughout the 1980s, the banks were literally on their own in the ways they reported earnings to shareholders and regulators. The resulting confusion led to a push for standardization of practices from all stakeholders, especially bankers, accountants, and Sharia scholars. Thus, in the early 1990s, members from each of these important professions collaborated to found AOFI. Today, AOFI's standards in Sharia and in auditing and accounting number more than 100. And within a single decade, Islamic finance went from a niche curiosity to a rules-based industry, all of which meant that conventional banks and money managers saw opportunity, as did the international law firms, which enabled them to do business in the world's capital markets. The next decade, the 2000s, saw the industry skyrocket as businesses, lawyers, scholars collaborated and innovated in meaningful ways. Alhamdulillah, that collaboration continues today, and it is based on experience, in addition to academic qualifications. The experience acquired by bankers and lawyers through working with Sharia scholars, and the experience acquired by Sharia scholars through working with bankers and lawyers. It is also based on mutual trust and an appreciation for the other's professions and traditions. So, what about Mullah Ali Qari and modern Islamic finance? In short, academic qualifications are only a part of the picture. They're insufficient, really. In our times, neither the qualifications for admission nor those acquired for a degree in Islamic finance are enough. And this applies to all three professions, really. To people majoring in business and thinking about going into Islamic finance, people who are studying the law and thinking about going into Islamic finance, and scholars of Sharia who are thinking about the same thing. All too often, people with less than full understanding of the principles and practices of our industry, and with the best of intentions, misrepresent, mistake, and mislead. So today I'd like to speak about the side of the industry that I know best, Sharia authenticity, perhaps the single most important aspect of our industry. From the early days, back in the 1980s, our Islamic banks discovered the best way to ensure authenticity was through convening meetings between bankers and Sharia scholars for the discussion of particular issues which would come up. In time, the banks established their own groups of scholars dedicated to offering timely opinions on the issues raised by the banks and their customers. In addition to these Sharia committees or Sharia boards, many banks established positions for internal Sharia auditors that worked with their Sharia boards and ensured compliance with the positions recommended or mandated. So what about Mullah Ali Qari? A study of the fatwa literature issued by the various Sharia boards in those early days reveals a good deal of contradiction, often stemming from the confusion I alluded to earlier between accountants, bankers, lawyers, and scholars. It is a well-known fact, the higher the level of studies, the more concentrated, focused, and specialized those studies become. The banks soon discovered that popular TV scholars, du'at, even authors of studies on subjects a little bit off the target, like zakat or awqaf, had little understanding of the workings of banks and capital markets, of investment opportunities, regulatory structures. This was especially true in regard to how conventional riba-based businesses function. Very few professionals were conversant in more than their own specialization. What is required for Sharia compliance are scholars specialized in commercial law, fiqh al-mu'amalat, a subject much ignored until recently, owing to the lingering influence of colonial models for finance. In many, if not most, of our traditional institutions of Sharia studies, mu'amalat are accorded no more than minimal attention. But beyond that very basic qualification, the further requisite for advising an Islamic financial institution or becoming a member of a Sharia supervisory board is familiarity, at the very least, with the workings of conventional finance, believe it or not, and the context, especially, in which these operate. For example, think of how many Sharia scholars are familiar with conventional bank loans, other than to condemn them and those who profit from them, right? But Islamic finance must comply with secular regimes using interest concepts. Islamic finance must compete with interest-based finance. Islamic finance oftentimes has the same objectives as loans. We have the same aims, the same kind of projects are presented. So if Islamic finance is to compete successfully, we need scholars who can answer questions. Do we recognize the types and terms of loans, the documentation, how funding and closing take place, what representations and warranties, what covenants, how to deal with them, with events of default and remedies in conventional finance, and how these may be of relevance to what we do in our sector. And as a further layer of complexity, how do the tax authorities look at all of this? At its core, Islamic finance is an alternative to the conventional riba-based system. It is demand-based because Muslims won't have anything to do with riba, especially now that we've become aware of the alternatives. But the demands are the same. Muslims, we need to safeguard our money. We need credit for our personal and business needs. We need to save for the future, for education, for retirement. We need to purchase homes and modes of transportation. But we want to do so in ways that conform to our religious beliefs and teachings. We need alternatives. I think of Islamic finance as a multi-layered puzzle in need of multiple solutions. And I will be the first to confess that Sharia scholarship alone is not enough to find those solutions. To frame the situation in another way, we might say that if Islamic finance has too many moving parts to be entrusted to an authority at arm's length with no exposure to the inner workings of an Islamic financial product or process. It must not be given over to an authority without the expertise or experience to pronounce fair judgment on an Islamic financial institution's Sharia authenticity or credentials or compliance with Sharia norms. In recognition of this fact, several Muslim jurisdictions have recognized this simple truth. Anxious to ensure the authenticity of Islamic financial institutions in their countries, they've established national Sharia boards. Rather than require those boards to do the impossible, in other words, noodle their way through the workings of every establishment, every bank, every Islamic financial institution in their countries, they have established they have entrusted those national Sharia boards with guidelines. And as long as these guidelines are followed, businesses operating in that, Islamic financial businesses operating in that country will be allowed to call themselves Sharia compliant. So the first requirement is that an Islamic financial institution must adhere to standards, whether they're the AOFI standards or whatever the case. In most cases, the AOFI standards are recognized worldwide. Secondly, it must maintain a Sharia board of at least 3 scholars, that Islamic financial institution, a bank or whatever the case may be. And the scholars must hold certain academic qualifications, have published research, and third, have a minimum number of years of experience. So to the students of Sharia here today, I'm not advocating that you spend years carrying my shoes and massaging my aching back. But what I am saying is that you must not ignore conventional finance and how it works. I, at present, am consulting with a Muslim jurisdiction about establishing postgraduate training in conventional finance for graduates of Sharia academies. And why? Because those newly appointed Sharia advisors need preparation for the realities presented by modern finance in the conventional way. So to the cyber muftis and online committees offering opinions on questions concerning Islamic financial institutions in their countries, I commend to you the example of jurisdictions with national Sharia boards that have established simple and effective criteria for ensuring compliance. Without citing examples or naming names, I can say with confidence that the pronouncements from cyber muftis and online committees are not always accurate. Without understanding the context in which a product was developed, without understanding the factors considered or the outside experts consulted, the pronouncements of such outsiders, however well-intentioned, cannot be accurate. But they can ensure that the guidelines mentioned above are followed. A certain business or undertaking may appear to run contrary to Sharia principles while claiming compliance. Then, rather than condemn the business or run it down in public, online or otherwise, or censure it in one way or another, recourse may be had to the simple guidelines. There's nothing to prevent making a private phone call or writing to a business with questions about adherence to the standards, or making suggestions for improvement, for improving the quality of their Sharia supervision, the personalities hired to help them, but for an outsider to publicize mere doubts in public automatically makes that business suspect in the eyes of Muslim consumers, convicted in the court of public opinion. That sort of work is the work of politicians, character assassination, not the way of concerned and well-intentioned believers. Are we heading clockwise or counterclockwise? So I hope my talk today at an event sponsored by an institution of higher learning here in Islamic finance clarifies the reason I feel I need to speak up. For those of you here in attendance, and as well as for the cyber muftis and social media influencers, and for a scattering of well-intentioned fatwa committees. Good intentions, husnul niyyah, husnul dhann bil ikhwan, all of these are good things. But let's not allow good intentions to wreak havoc on a small but growing Islamic financial sector here in the United States by steering sincere people, sincere and religious people, in the wrong direction. Oftentimes, sadly, on the basis of ill-informed assumptions. Obviously, these are my opinions, and I share them with you in hopes that together we may share in the growth of this important industry right here in the United States, inshallah ta'ala. Most of the institutions I work with are based outside of the United States. And for some time we've been looking toward the United States because so many of the investments that they make are right here in the United States, the stock market being a big one, real estate, and so many other activities. People would be very surprised to learn how Islamic money is actually being allocated to projects here in the United States, big projects. So alhamdulillah, there is a lot of interest on the part of Muslim investors in our economy. However, there's not been a lot of interest in our Muslim population. And that needs to change. And it's through your efforts, mashallah, that a beginning is being made. And I'm very optimistic, certainly hopeful, and prayerful as well, that Allah Ta'ala will give each and every one of you the tawfiq to succeed in whatever endeavors you may pursue. فجزاكم الله خيرا. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.